Hello, it's the Great Canadian Bagel here, coming to you with this week's U.S. presidential election projection video. There's a lot of polls this week and a lot of movement. If you frequent a lot of poll aggregators, there's a lot of other poll aggregators, I should say. There's a lot of disagreement, like 338 Canada has Trump's chances going up, 538 has them go down. Real Clear's about saying it's about the same state it was last week. So a lot of disagreement there. My model also disagrees with all of them. I guess it somewhat agrees with 338 Canada, which I guess kind of makes sense because mine uses that as a base and then it modifies it, at least until I have enough time in my life to create a new model. But I don't think that's going to happen this election. I don't think I have enough time. But needless to say, I'm here for my own projection, which, as stated in the past, is based on the 338 one, but it's modified based on my own polling averages and polling aggregations, which we'll get into at the end of the video. But first, since the reason why you're here is you want to see the projection, so I'm going to go through it in standard fashion, starting with the safe Democrat seats. So we have California, Hawaii, New York, Maryland, D.C., Vermont, Massachusetts. The safe Democrat seats. Solid 115 electoral votes, and barring some wild turn of events where the Republican candidate gets plus 20 point popular vote margin, these will almost always be in the Democratic column for the next foreseeable future. Obviously, state leanings change over time because, George W. Bush, California, voted Republican, so it happens, but for the foreseeable future, that is going to be moving to safe Republican. We have Utah, Idaho, Montana, Wyoming, North Dakota, South Dakota, Nebraska at large, Nebraska 1st, Nebraska 3rd, Kansas, Oklahoma, Arkansas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Tennessee, Kentucky, Indiana, and West Virginia. And Maine 2nd. These are the safe districts for Republicans. A bit fewer total electoral seats, but it's starting to even out, and I think on average the safe seats are probably about always going to be in the slight Democratic advantage. Or I'm going to rephrase this. The Democrats are always going to have more safe seats than the Republicans because the Democrats are much more concentrated in a few big states. I think that is pretty obvious. I don't know why I'm bringing that out, but it's true. They're very concentrated into a few big states. So moving into lean Democrat, we got Washington, Maine's 1st, Delaware, Connecticut, Rhode Island, and Illinois. Still not really surprising. West Coast, Northeast, pretty common. Pretty generic, really, so far. Moving into likely Republican seats, Arkansas, Tennessee, that's Texas. Wow. Okay. Missouri, Ohio, Georgia, and South Carolina. The biggest movement we've seen really in the GOP's favor in the last few weeks is that this corner of the country, and Texas particularly, have gotten much safer for the Republicans, which is good because any situation where the Republicans lose Texas and Georgia, the Republican Party's dead. At least in the foreseeable future. Maybe if they make a huge gains in the Northeast or the Midwest, they can survive losing Texas and Georgia, but for the time being, until the Midwest is a very safe Republican area, if they lose Texas and Georgia, the party's dead. At least. It needs a major rebuild. So, going into Democrat lean, we have Oregon, Colorado, New Mexico, Virginia, New Jersey, New Hampshire, in Maine at large. Really, no surprises here. Again, I guess the only surprising thing is maybe Oregon's only a lean margin. It's hovering between lean and likely often, but again, not that surprising. Moving into the lean Republican column, we get Arizona, but by a hair. This is almost a tilt state. It's hovering between tilt Democrat to lean Republican, depending on where you are in the polling cycle, because some polls are more disfavorable to Trump and some are more favorable to him. So depending on when the poll orders are released, this can sway from lean Democrat or tilt Democrat to lean Republican. Right now we are on the more favorable polls that have been released recently for Trump, so it is lean column. But Arizona is a state to watch going into the election day. This one's very swingy. I don't think it actually matters too much for the result of the election, but it'll still be interesting to see which column it lands in. We got Nebraska second. I've been meaning to fill that out separately for Nebraska, but I forget in the last couple of videos. So, sorry, people living in Nebraska second district. We got Iowa. We got North Carolina. Same deal with North Carolina with Arizona, though North Carolina is a much more important state in that I think North Carolina is kind of a harbinger for how the rest of this area of the southeast is going to go, like Virginia to Florida area. If North Carolina ends up swinging to tilt Democrat, which it does depending on the poll, it sometimes is the tilt Democrat column. If it lands in tilt Democrat, I think they're probably going to do quite well in this region, but if it hits lean Republican, then obviously Trump's doing great. That's really good for him. That's a state he needs to win. Florida, also same deal with North Carolina and Arizona. Very big harbingers. And then we have Pennsylvania and Wisconsin. Pennsylvania has been quite safe is the wrong word. It's been pretty strongly in the lean Republican camp in my model for the last couple weeks now. I think the least safe it's been was tilt Republican. I don't think it's been Democrat since the first at all in the model. I don't recall. I don't look at every single week offhand. I could double check that if I wanted to, but the point of the matter is Pennsylvania is getting very safe for the Republicans. Wisconsin is also the same deal as all the others. It's sometimes tilt Republican, or sometimes it's lean. I believe it's been the lean column for Democrats, so it's very swingy. But so far, it's lean Republican. Or today, it is. Going into Democrat tilt, we have Nevada, which is really big movement, actually. This went from being, like, very, almost close to likely to being within, like, 1 percentage point in the last week. So, that's a pretty big deal. Or not, it's not a big deal. It's a lot of movement. It's a lot of movement in Nevada, which is kind of surprising because Nevada does vote more rightwards than the nation as a whole, or the U.S. as a whole does. But still, it's been pretty safe in the Democrat column since 2004. It was close last election in 2016, but we'll see. We have Minnesota as well, which is a good movement for Biden. Minnesota had 2 weeks ago flipped pretty solidly into the Trump column. Then last week it was only tilt, and now it is back to tilt Democrat, and Biden needs to win Minnesota. Mostly because if he loses Minnesota, the reason why he would lose Minnesota is because he's lost. The Democratic Party under Biden would have lost support of the working class, because Minnesota votes very Democrat because there's a lot of unions, there's a lot of labor working class voters there who classically voted Democrat because the Democrats have been the party that fights for the labor the most in the past. losing Minnesota would suggest that they have completely miscounted that electorate. And really, the Midwest being swinging Republican is kind of that whole thing, but Minnesota is the biggest case study for it because Minnesota has more of that than the other 3 states in the Midwest, like the main Rust Belt states of Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. And then we go to tilt Republican, we get to Michigan. Michigan is almost too close to call him, but it is just enough of a lead to Trump that I think it is, and I can call it for him comfortably, but it's very close. I think it would be reasonable for a viewer to sit here and say, no, Michigan's too close to call based on my model. But I'm calling it. It's very close. Michigan is probably going to go to Trump by very similar margins that it went to Trump in 2016 if the election was held today. Obviously, it's not going to be held today. We still have just under 2 months of these projections going forward, but that's where we stand. This is the most likely outcome. Now to move into the best and worst case scenarios for Trump and Biden, respectively. So the best case for Trump is this. For those of you watching, not a lot of movement. New Mexico swung back into tilt Democrat column. California is no longer safe. Otherwise, really not. Georgia's no longer safe for the Republicans. Otherwise, there's really not a lot of movement. I think Michigan and Wisconsin became lean instead of likely, and Minnesota too. So there's not a ton of movement. The best case for Trump is closing. His best case isn't as good as it was before. His we'll get into this in a minute, but his both parties' margin polling, confidence intervals are getting tighter. So I think we're going to start seeing these best case scenarios start trending towards this scenario. Obviously not necessarily this particular map, but the most likely scenario is going to get more and more, a higher and higher percentage of the probability because the confidence intervals are getting tighter. But we'll see going forward. And this is Biden's best case scenario, and those of you who are avid poll watchers might realize Biden's best case scenario in my model is the most likely scenario in most other models right now. Wow, that's kind of funny. I don't think that really says anything. I guess my model's more favorable to Trump than most other people, but I think that's because most of the other models are wrong. They are taking... Sorry, the models aren't wrong. The polling data is wrong. I think they are completely underrepresenting, A, Republicans to begin with, and B, I think they are not doing a good job of trying to actually get people who vote Trump. A lot of people are... There was a poll recently where a bunch of people are scared to say, I think it was like 28% of independents are scared to voice who they're going to vote for. So, obviously some of those could be like Biden supporters in very Republican areas, very Trump areas specifically, because Republican supporters and Trump supporters are different per se. Trump supporters are much more vocal about, like, the strong Trump supporter crowd is very vocal. So there is instances where a Biden supporter may not feel comfortable voicing their support, but I think that really overwhelmingly leads to people who are not Trump supporters but are willing to vote for Trump over Biden. For whatever reason, I'm not going to get into why they might want to do that. That's not the point of the video. But to go into this, so what has really been the changes? So Georgia, Texas are now lean Republican column. There's a few more states that are safe. Some more likely for Republicans. Florida's now only tilt. North Carolina's still Republican. But that's not a ton of movement. Like the Rust Belt is only lean instead of likely. Same with Arizona and Nevada. So it's been a lot. This actually got a lot worse for Biden. in their best case scenario, in his best case scenario, which is now the default scenario for most of their models, which is amusing to me. But now we're going to switch into model stuff. So if I brought this up here we go. Okay, good. I had to do some weird shenanigans today to make sure this worked because my recording software was being weird. So I can't actually interact with the cells on the spreadsheet because the recording software doesn't want to work for me. But I do have the ability to paint on it, so I guess that's close enough. So just like last week, these numbers here are forward projections from today. They do not necessarily hold any meaningful weight. Do not take them too seriously. They're just me musing to see if I can kind of guess what it's going to go based on my previous data. Presumably, with enough data, I will be able to actually project the coming mood barring big swings. It has worked a couple times already, but obviously this is an election, so big swings are a thing that happens. So the main thing I want to draw attention to is since last week on the 3rd, Biden's margin of errors went from 3 to 2.47. So his confidence interval's a lot tighter. And Trump's went from 8.52 to 4.4. That is a huge decrease in the margin of error. And corresponding with that, Trump's gained from 46.6 to 48.3. So he's gained, I think that works out to be like 2.7 points. Biden's lost 4 points, or sorry, 0.4 percentage points, and Trump's gained like 2.7. So even though his margin of error went down, but since he went up, his best case scenario hasn't changed much. But Biden went down, and his confidence interval went down, so his best case went down, which is interesting. We see, looking over here, again, about right here is the forward projecting, so that's not necessarily real numbers. But we get right here, Trump has just narrowly pulled ahead. Now, he's actually lost a bit of support since last week. That last week is about right here. No, that's a lie. That's not last week. I'm dumb. He's gained a ton of support since last week. Last week was right here, September 3rd. So he's gained a bunch of support. He went from like, well, he went like this. This big support gain. Biden's lost a bunch of support in the polls. It got a lot tighter. I will caveat here, I have dumped a couple polls. There's one from Monmouth, which is very favorable, much more favorable to Biden than it is Trump, or I'm going to rephrase that, than my average is. But I dumped the Monmouth poll because it is such an outlier for all the other recent polls. A lot of the other recent polls, or the Monmouth poll adjusted to my model, or to my criteria, adjusted how I've adjusted all the polls, has Biden's lead go from about tie to like 4 or 5 points, which is way outside the margin of error for what Biden's lead should be. So I'm going to add it in if more polls show up like that, but in the meantime, until I see more polls that are showing Biden around that support level, I'm not counting that poll. Feel free to criticize me in the comment section below for neglecting a poll that is very favorable to Biden. That's the reality I'm telling you right now, so you can factor that in with how much you want to consider the model I'm proposing to you here. Now, below here is the trend that I've been having. So the dots are the polling results from the different polls on the different days. I haven't actually extended this as far forward as it should be. That doesn't really matter. That doesn't really, as you can see, it seems to cut off like right there when we're on We have polls that from September 8th, so it really should be going a bit further forward. But in interest of not trying to fix this live, what we can say is that Trump has a very meaningful trend, an R squared of 0.5807 by my model. Really, to anyone who knows anything about statistics, this should scream that this is, whether or not you agree with my final number of 48.3 for his support, he has definitely gained support. He has a correlation of 0.766. So R of 0.766. That's pretty big. He's definitely gained support. I think that's almost undisputable. Like that kind of correlation is so huge for something like this. Normally you wouldn't expect that much of a correlation from this kind of data. So it's objectively, I think, by my model's criteria, he has gained support. Whether you agree with the final number or not, that's to be disputed. You can comment in the sections if you think I missed polls or anything. Though I won't be listing the specific polls I use, but I'll be listing all the pollsters that I've taken polls from in the comment section. I just don't want to try to copy and paste all those hyperlinks. That's too much work. Criticize me about that if you want. I'm lazy. Biden, his correlation, his R squared is actually getting bigger too. So he's also gaining support, but it is very, very, very small confidence on this right now. It's a correlation of 0.26. Exactly. Actually, it's exactly 0.26, which is amusing. So that correlation is going up with time. So I think it's safe to say he's, at least since I started on August 12th when he was about 48-ish, he seems to be going up on average. Oh, I guess you can even look here, on 19th of August, he was exactly 48.2. And technically speaking, he's only 47.9 right now, but right now he just had a small dip because I think there's because of I don't know why he's had a dip, but he has a dip really, like the last couple of days was just off this graph really. So we only have to, like right here on the graph, and at that point, yes, he's definitely gained points. Okay, wait. Okay, not okay. Give me a second. This is too much. I need to actually update this to be proper. Bear with me. I'm doing this live, boys. We're doing it live. This is the end of the video, so like, I mean, like, subscribe, share, comment, yell at me for being dumb, yell at me for, I don't know, making a model that fabled to Trump. That's not the intention, but that's what happened. But yeah, if you don't actually care about this stuff, you can exit now. But if you care, just give me a second. I'll be ready. Oh. Okay. Did this work now? Let's look at this. Here we go. I got it working. So, the only thing that has changed here is right here. So, they're neck and neck right here now. And if we look at this, actually, Biden's confidence R squared has collapsed. That's like a 0.14. Like 0.14 is real. A correlation of 0.14 is essentially saying you don't have a correlation. Whereas Trump's correlation of 0.81, that's like indisputable. My model is showing he's going upwards. We'll see if that continues. I think he probably doesn't have much more ground to gain. I really doubt Trump's going to break 50%. If he does, I don't know, I'll eat a sock. I'm not actually going to do that. I mean, I'm not. Though that'd be kind of funny, but I'm not going to do it. But yeah, that's the end of the video. So, like I said, If you like this kind of stuff, please like, share, subscribe, comment. I will happily discuss with you the ins and outs of the model, where I think polling's going to go in the comments if you want to talk to me there. If you have more specific questions or something, feel free to go ahead. Otherwise, have a great day.